New York may not be the city of lights, but it has been home to over 100,000 neon signs over the years. Although only a handful of these historic signs remain, the art of neon is still alive in Tribeca at Let There Be Neon, one of the city's last remaining neon craftsman shops. Technology may change the standard for signage, but neon is now cooler than ever, with artists, designers, and brands all gravitating towards this nostalgic light. Today we're meeting up with Jeff Friedman, the owner of Let There Be Neon, a man who, much like New York, is no stranger to neon signs.
A boy's born in hot time, Mississippi, surrounded by four walls that ain't so pretty. His parents give him love and affection to keep him strong, moving in the right direction, living just enough for the city.
So now neon has gone in waves of popularity throughout the years, and Let There Be Neon has been here through a large number of these changes. So tell us about the historical evolution of neon in New York.
So when Let There Be Neon was founded in 1972 by Rudi Stern, neon was on a downward spiral because it was being replaced by fluorescent signs, which seemed to be new and fresh. And neon at that time seemed like maybe a little old and archaic. Also, very important fact, and it still happens today, is that people equate neon with like old dirty bars and scuzziness and stuff. But in the 70s, it was fluorescent signs that were beating the heck out of neon. But because of Let There Be Neon, in our humble opinion, we started to see a resurgence of neon lighting and new possibilities. And this arc has continued. Like any business, there's ups and downs with anything. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, we started to see LEDs come into effect. In the Times Square area, which is the most obvious and specific example I can give you, in New York, the LEDs started to replace the neon signs. And so that was like another downward tick on the scale, so to speak. And I would say the last 5-6 years, we've seen another upward movement of it because there's really become a new appreciation for what is basically a handmade item.
Now, the late Rudi Stern has been credited with reviving the lost art of neon, and he's even referred to by some as the godfather of neon.
Right.
What did he do so differently, including the shop, that made such an impact on the history of neon?
Well, clearly Rudi discovered that he could bring neon to the masses. That's the main thing. And so what Rudi saw the need for was to bring old neon pieces that had already existed into display, and he created the first neon gallery, a gallery dedicated to neon lights, which was Let There Be Neon. And eventually what happened, and it happened very quickly, is that Rudi had this brilliant concept to not only save the old existing neon signs and showcase them and sell them and therefore keep the business profitable and in motion, but he created the opportunity for people for the very first time to come into a place and have their own signs created that weren't necessarily like businesses. And that's how Let There Be Neon really started.
What we're interested in doing with Let There Be Neon, and what we have been interested in doing from the beginning, is to make the medium of neon accessible, so that if somebody has a fantasy of a neon sunrise, we can make it for them. And
he started to create pieces that wouldn't have been created without his vision. Now, Rudi himself was an artist, but he didn't create the neon. His art was really moving pieces around on a chessboard, and those pieces happened to have been ideas and people, and that's what he did so brilliantly. And so there's no question that Rudi is the godfather of neon, so to speak. You know, I remember that time. I came to work there in 1977, and they had already been around for 5-6 years or so, and it was just such a creative environment. And everybody had the opportunity to do something with this light form. And the most exciting thing about it was not knowing anything about the light form allows you to create stuff that you wouldn't necessarily create if you knew too much about it, because you'd think that there were limitations and restrictions. But when you don't know anything about it, the canvas is completely blank. And that's what Rudi did, and that's what we did. And I will say, I mean, we created pieces Like if you see now, it seems so obvious, if you go into a bar or restaurant and you see a Budweiser sign with a palm tree on it, okay? I'm convinced that it had not been for Let There Be Neon, you wouldn't see that palm tree on the Budweiser sign. It would just say Budweiser, and it would have their logo. But that's the kind of stuff that we made. A couple of years, and it always takes a couple of years because people who are not creative need a lot of time to think of non-creative things. And I'd go into a mall or something and see like a little palm tree on a base or a little neon heart on a base. But that all started with us.
So Rudi was really the first person to introduce neon into people's homes.
No question in my mind. That's what I believe, absolutely.
Now, this shop has been a part of some notable moments in pop culture, from Studio 54 to Sex and the City.
Right.
So what are some of your past client projects that people might remember or recognize?
So, you know, Studio 54 is a great example because when I first came to the company, Let There Be Neon had done this incredible neon installation at a club called Infinities, which predated Studio 54 in New York by maybe only a few months, but it was the first dance club, so to speak, that featured neon as the primary light source. And from there, Studio 54 started to happen. And I remember doing the installation, we worked with lighting designers, and it was just people using the medium of neon in completely new and fresh ways that had absolutely never been thought about before. I mean, who would think about putting neon in a club? Now it seems so boring and stuff because you just put lights, but it had never happened before. And with Studio 54, I remember the specific pieces because I was doing the installation work at that time, working, you know, being young and naive and working for Let There Be Neon at that time. And I remember the pieces being installed on these huge panels because Studio 54 was really a theater originally, and it was a theatrical experience for people, which is how it became to be. And they would have these panels fly down from the ceiling, and the ceilings were huge there. And the panels had neon lights on them, and they had incandescent bulbs. And the panels, in addition to flashing and sequencing, would also spin like crazy. And it was, you know, I don't know how many, I'm going to say a couple of dozen of these panels. And so that was one of the main lighting effects at Studio 54. And I remember very clearly installing that. And I have a great story about Studio 54. So, because of course it was so hard and difficult to get into because of the rope in front.
Right.
And they kind of invented that, didn't they?
This is the scene outside a New York disco called Studio 54. This is the place that's in with the disco crowd, except that these people are still out. One of the owners, Steve Rebell, works the door. He is choosy about who gets in, and that adds to the mystique and the desperation to be accepted.
At one of the reopenings, because they would always close, they were very clever about this, they would always close for like a month or so and completely renovate the club and then reopen to make it so fresh, and they always kept it so fresh and alive that way, and the reopening would always be so completely different and new. And I remember this moment where it was during one of those reopenings, and we were, of course, rushing because we were on a deadline. It was a major press event. We knew it was opening like on this specific night. The stuff had to be done and operational. And at the last moment, a piece broke during installation, which happens. It's glass. Neon is glass. And I remember rushing back to the shop. We got the piece fixed, and I arrived with it. It was a long, straight tube. And at that point, there was like hundreds of people in front of the velvet rope. The club wasn't quite open yet, but they were getting ready to open for the big shebang. And I held the neon above my head, and the doormen were expecting us, of course. And when he saw me, like the crowd just parted, and I said, well, now that's one way to get into a club. So that's my memory of the Studio 54
Did
neon.
people start lining up with neon signs to try and get in?
Well, I wasn't there after the fact, but...
Neon has become a large part of the contemporary art world. Curtis Coolidge is one artist that immediately comes to mind. What do you think has been the impetus for this shift in how neon is used, and how much of your work is now devoted to art versus commercial?
Sure. Well, we do a tremendous amount of contemporary artwork, and we work directly with the artists. And it's hard to put my finger on when that shift actually occurred, because there were artists using neon as a medium even before Let There Be Neon started. You know, it was Douglas Wheeler, who was one of the minimalists who worked with it, Bruce Nauman for many years, Stephen Antonakis, all these early artists. Chrissa was another one in like the mid to late 60s. started using neon in sculptural ways as a light form, and they found it beautiful and they use it in ways that had never been used before. Let There Be Neon opens in 1972, and what Rudi did was he brought together a whole bunch of different people from different backgrounds, artists, writers, philosophers, and everybody was creating this neon in, again, new ways. It was like the sum of the parts theory. And so what would happen is that artists started to discover neon.
In the 70s, early 70s, I began showing a lot around the country in galleries and museums. And I was beginning now to get the reaction of the general public to neon. It was, for them, unbelievable thing to see, to go to a museum and see large neon tubes on walls or on the floor, what have you.
And it became very popular and very creative and very expensive, that art. And it kind of faded away because those guys moved on to different mediums, because they were, in the truest sense, artists. They weren't neon artists, they were artists. And all of a sudden, and I would have to give most of the credit for the new contemporary work to Tracy Emin. So Tracy fell in love with neon, and I know the story because I asked her about it. And when she was a young child in the north of England, there's like a seaside resort that I guess would equate to Arcony Island, that type of place, that families would go to for holidays. And she was just hypnotized by all the neon that she saw. And as a young child, and then when she became an artist and got a little older, she started to experiment with the neon. And I think that Tracy, without a doubt, is the starting point for the new contemporary art movement. But what's so fantastic about it is, of course, the true artist, somebody like Curtis, has taken that and done something different with it, or done their own thing with it. There are imitators, as there is with everything. But to me, that work is very obvious. It's the more creative work, the Tracy Emins, the Curtis Coolidge, a lot of other people that we work with. And you know, we're still working with Douglas Wheeler, who's one of the original users of neon in his artwork. And there's a huge show of his at the Guggenheim in March that we're going to be a part of, and we're very excited about that.
Commercial signage is still a huge part of the neon business, but have you seen a change in what your business clients request now as opposed to the 1970s?
I think that they're being more creative now, the business clients, and they're taking more chances, which is pretty interesting. So it used to be like, here's our logo, we'd like it in the window in neon, and that's that. But now what they're doing is they're bringing neon away from the front windows of their shop, like even if it's a restaurant, but they take it away from the windows. Now they're bringing it inside the restaurant. They do a lot of work and a lot of artwork and a lot of creative neon inside the restaurant. And you might say, well, it's neon, it's still bright, it's glaring. We offer them dimmers for neon so they can tone the light down and you can still enjoy it, which is also kind of a new approach to it.
I've seen there's been a big shift towards the sort of script font too in neon that you didn't really see as much back in the day.
We see a lot of creative fonts being used and people asking, can you do this? And they're amazed, yes, we can do it. Because neon is a line, basically. So it's a line of light. So if you give us a font, if it's not too tiny, we can definitely recreate the font. Tracy Emin's work, of course, is her handwriting mostly. And people come to us all the time and they go like, we want this Tracy Emin piece. And of course, no, we're not gonna duplicate that. Morally, it's just incorrect. But if you're interested in the neon and you're interested in writing something, give us your handwriting. There's nothing wrong with that. And they're amazed because they're not coming because they want to imitate it. They didn't think that it was possible that we could take their handwriting and create something, and it makes it even better for them because it's their handwriting.
So all of your neon signs are still made by hand here in the glass room, just as they were in 1972.
Absolutely. And
the craft of making neon is described as half art, half science. So can you walk us through the process of making a neon sign?
So it's an interesting point of view. In terms of science, neon is a vacuum tube. And so it doesn't burn out. It could last 40, 50, 60 years. We have some signs in the shop that are that old. And there's no filament inside the tube. And that's why it's considered like a cold cathode tube. That's the science part of it, because there's no filament. And so because there's no filament, it won't burn out. I mean, there are parts of the tube that can fail like anything else aside from breakage, but neon is so efficient in that respect. And so the easy explanation is that neon is a glass tube that is bent over a fire to shape. And when the shape is completed, we put an electrode on one end and an electrode on another. We hook it up to our manifold. We create a vacuum inside the tube. We burn the impurities out. And when the tube is ready and pure and there's no impurities like air or some dust or whatnot in the tube, through a manifold system, we enter the pure neon gas into the tube, which is held in a tank, and we seal it off. And then we light it up with a particular transformer. And pretty much what happens is that the molecules inside the tube get all excited and they bang into each other, and that causes light. And that's how neon works.
You have a large selection of colors lit up on the wall over here. How does the neon tubing get each of those hues?
So there's a combination of the glass itself and the gas. We use two types of gas. It's neon, which is red, and argon, which is blue. And so the tubes themselves, the glass itself might be colored. The glass might be clear and have a phosphorus on the inside, very similar to a fluorescent lamp. So you don't know what the color is until it's lit. And the UV light in the gas helps it emit that specific color. So the chemicals are mixed. We don't do the chemical mixing. We buy that from a sign supply house. There are people who specifically do that as a business to the sign industry. Neon now is a small part of the sign industry, but that still exists. So even with a white tube, there are different temperatures of white because we can chemically mix the powder to give it those different temperatures, whether it's warm, cool, or a mid-range. And there's even more. There's like 10, 12 different temperatures of white that are available to us. And that's true for any color. So if you took a blue tube and put red neon gas in it, you get pink. It's like mixing watercolors. It's the same concept.
So there's been a push as of late to preserve historic signs in the city, and Let There Be Neon was trusted with restoring two of the city's oldest neon signs, Gringer and Russ and Daughters, I believe.
Oh, that's correct, right. Well, we actually, and we're working on two possible very interesting pieces now as well. So we're really proud of that because we believe in the history of it as well. And New York is so funny like that because the old is always out and in with the new. And it happens before anybody could turn around and blink an eye. So we were given the opportunity to properly restore both of those signs. And what was so interesting about them is that both of those signs, the businesses are still operational. And why are they still operational and why are the signs still on the building? Because they own the buildings. If they didn't own the buildings, forget about it. They would have been long gone. The signs would have been history as well. So that was really good. We also did the Old Town on 18th Street, which is one of my favorite places. And it's a great, great sign. And we are actually Monday morning, we're going to restore a sign that was just uncovered through construction on Nassau Street in the financial district. So the Two Boots Pizzeria is opening up a new shop on Nassau Street in the financial district. And during construction, they uncovered in the storefront, which was overwhelmed by years and years of like bad metal work and plywood and pieces on top of pieces on top of pieces, and they uncovered this original Lofts candy sign, which is from the late 40s, early 50s, and it was so fantastic. So everybody was so excited about it, and there's this little sign collective going on Instagram, and everybody was like tweeting about it and everything, and it was like, save the sign, save the sign. And the landlord, who also didn't know that the sign was there, which is amazing, loves the sign so much, she decided to have us save the sign. So even though Two Boots is opening there, we're restoring the Lofts candy sign. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece, and it's actually attached to the building itself. It's not independent from the building, so that makes it even more special.
So how does the restoration process differ from that of making a custom sign?
Well, so here you've got, in this particular case, the Lofts candy sign are these beautiful stainless steel letters that are adhered directly to the building. And they have what we call open faces. And that just means that they're open in front and the neon is inset into the faces and it's visible or exposed. And so the tubes are broken. They really exist, but they're just broken. But we're going to remove the letters, bring them back to the shop, template them, and repair them, because neon can be fixed and it'll last for 50, 60 years. It'll be fantastic. And the other interesting thing about this is that we're working with the artist Stephen Powers, and Stephen is going to treat the letters once we remove the neon and clean them up and bring them back to their original splendor, and then we'll bring the neon back and rewire it and put new transformers on it. And you know, so it's not going to look spick and span because nobody wants it to.
Right.
It'll look authentic, and that's the goal.
So even if you don't want to have a custom sign made or have one restored, you can always come here and take a look at your neon art gallery and rotating exhibits. So what are some of your favorite pieces on display in the shop?
You know, it's hard to say because I really like the permanent artworks that we display, like Daniel Bruce is one of the artists who we have a piece of, Curtis Coolidge and Tracy Emin currently. Also Gary Rosenbaum has a few pieces here. And so I really like the permanent artwork, and it comes and goes. I also mostly like the new pieces that we create that are only here for a brief period of time. They're just like beautiful in their own fleeting way. They're here, we're looking at them, and then they're gone. They go to their use, whether it's for people's homes, a restaurant, special event, whatnot. But I also like the Chinese dragon piece a lot. That's a prop piece that we made for Spider-Man 2 movie originally, and people use it for music video shoots a lot, and so you'll see it in the background quite often. And it was also in the Netflix Jessica Jones series. They use that piece as well. So that's one of my favorite stock pieces.
Living just enough for the city.